Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 7 from the Road to Latin textbook and specifically look at the second story of chapter 7 called Servae Claudiae. So we've already talked a little bit about chapter 7 and its grammar, so if you haven't taken a look, the first thing you want to do is go back and just make sure that you understand that, and you want to really start with vocab, maybe more than anything. Start with the vocab, make sure you have a good sense of it, you understand the words. It should be pretty straightforward at this point. If you've already done the first part of chapter 7, the vocab doesn't change for this second story. So hopefully you're feeling comfortable with it, and the grammar you're feeling okay with, using the prepositional phrases with the ablative case, things like that. And if you're in that spot and you feel pretty good, you'll be ready to roll for this story. Like I've said before, if you want to take a look at this story in a little different light or different context, feel free to go to my website, Nova Latin, and take a look. You'll find the story there. You'll find the English translation, a section with the cases highlighted, practice problems, all sorts of things. So if that helps you, go for it, have fun. Just to, like I said, see the story in a slightly different way. But again, once you have the vocab, the grammar under control, you're ready to translate. You want to read this story first. So I always say it, but read the story aloud. Find someone who can read the story back to you. This way you're practicing your speaking and your pronunciation by reading it, but also your listening skills by having someone read it back to you. It's really important that you don't shut those off when you're trying to learn Latin. Really, with any language, it doesn't matter. But Latin is just like any other language you might learn. You can't speak a new language without at least hearing it and trying to say it yourself. So once you have done all that and you feel like you're in a good position, now it's time to translate the second story. So let's dive in. It starts by saying Claudia est domina multarum servarum. So this is a new character, right, in our story. It's a woman named Claudia, right? Claudia, there's your subject. And she's called the domina multarum servarum. She's the mistress, the domina. And then multarum servarum is genitive plural. So you're saying of many slaves, right? She is their mistress, is the idea. Then you have Servae Claudiae in terra et in villa quotidiae laborant. So the Servae, the slaves, and they're the slaves of Claudia. So how did I know that Claudiae was genitive, right? This is something we've been talking about for the first 7 chapters, and particularly the last few. What do we do with this AE ending? So when you have Servae, that's your subject. How did I know that? Well, your verb is laborant, which ends in an NT. It's a plural verb ending. So I'm looking for a subject that would mean they are working. Slaves makes a ton of sense, right? The AE ending being nominative plural sounds good. The other noun we have is Claudiae, but it can't be the subject because if it were nominative plural, it would mean there's more than one Claudia, which we know there isn't, right? So you wouldn't be saying the Claudias are working. It makes so much more sense for the slaves to be working. So what do we do with Claudiae? Well, the only other options are dative and genitive singular. Dative doesn't make sense here because you wouldn't say that the slaves are working for Claudia. I know in English that kind of makes some sense. That's not how the Latin works, though. There's no indirect object happening here. We don't have one of our special adjectives like pleasing or near, right? Or even friendly, right? It just doesn't work. The best way to think about it is genitive because in the previous sentence, we just said that Claudia is the mistress of many slaves. So it makes sense to say in the next line, the slaves of Claudia, right? So it's just a quick side note, but that type of thinking and looking at the whole context of the sentence is how you always want to approach these. Think about what makes the most sense. So we're saying the slave women of Claudia, laborant, they work. Quotidiae means daily, right? So every day, you could say they're working, or you could say they daily work, however you want to translate it, it'll be fine. So they work every day, and then you have 2 prepositional phrases. Both of them are ablative. You can tell by the long mark over the A, right? That macron over the A is telling you ablative singular, first declension. But think about why. When we're saying in terra et in villa, we're showing the position or location, right? They're working on the land and in the house, right? Meaning that they're either outside doing something or they're inside doing something. But in both prepositional phrases, we're just showing where they are. So if you think of what we learned, in the previous video on chapter 7, we talked a little bit about the prepositional phrasing or prepositional phrases and how they can use the ablative case. This would be the example that I laid out for you in my grammar notes. When you're showing position or location without really any movement, that's where you use the ablative case. So it's just saying where they work, on the land, right? They're outside, and in the house, in villa. Then you keep going, and you have Claudia servis cara est, quod est domina benigna. Okay, so here's another one of these, to me anyway, kind of sticky lines, but we'll translate it for what it is, even though, like I've said, I wouldn't have necessarily wrote this in my textbook, but it is what it is. It's an older textbook. So we have Claudia, right, there's your subject. She is, est, cara, which means dear. Kara is one of those adjectives where we're expecting a dative noun, right? Because you're saying she's dear to someone. And we have it right here with Serves. That long is, right, is a dative plural ending, right? So you're saying that she's dear to the slave girls, meaning that they care about her. Why? Quod est, because she is a domina benigna. She's a kind mistress. And again, like I said, I'm not going to censor out what Road to Latin has done here, but this imagery is always kind of problematic. The idea that you'd have a kind mistress and it makes her slave girls, really like her. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. It just kind of makes it a little sticky, I think, at least to me. But we'll take it for what it is. The sentence and the grammar is not too difficult to figure out when you remember that Kara is one of these adjectives we've been learning about that takes a dative case, right? Otherwise, there's nothing too crazy about that. Then you have Servae Canam parant et Wilam ornant. So the subject again is the Servae, and it makes sense because we have two plural verbs, parant and ornant, right? The NT is giving it away that they are doing something. So to kind of fill that role of where's the subject, Servae works, nominative plural. You're saying the slaves, parant, they prepare. What do they prepare? We have an accusative here. They prepare canam, they prepare dinner, right? And they ornant, wilam. Ornant means they decorate, right? And you're asking yourself, okay, well, what do they decorate? We need another accusative, direct object. It's wilam. Again, the am ending is giving it away. So you're saying the slaves prepare dinner and they decorate the house. Then you keep going, you have sed Servae Claudiae non semper laborant. So sed just means but. So you're saying they do this, but the Servae Claudiae, the slave women of Claudia, again, this phrase we saw in the second sentence, the same logic applies. Servae would be your nominative plural subject, which if you go through your progression of Claudiae being either nominative plural, dative singular, or genitive singular, you're going to see genitive singular is the only one that makes sense with that AE ending, right? The slave women of Claudia. So you're saying, but the slave women of Claudia, non semper laborant, they don't only, or rather always, semper means always, right? They don't always work, laborant, right? So it's saying they do other things. What are the other things they do? Well, this is where we keep going in this paragraph. It's a short story, so this is the last piece. But it's about to explain to you what they do. Here we have the word noctu again, and I told you in the previous video for chapter 7 to treat this as a vocab word. It just means at night. It is technically ablative. Where we haven't seen this yet, we won't for a while in terms of grammar, but it is an ablative noun, and like I said, you just want to mentally prep yourself. The ablative by itself can be used to show time. For now, if you think of it just as a vocab word, noctu means at night. So you're saying at night, right? Servae e cassis properant, et in ora et in silvis ambulant. So again, at night, noctu, the slave women, there's your subject, they properant, they hasten, right? Hustle or hasten. A cassis, out of the house. Remember a, that E with a long mark, it's pronounced a. It's an alternative of X. And usually what happens in Latin is if your noun after it in the prepositional phrase starts with a consonant, you'd have E with a long mark, A. If it's followed by a vowel, you'd have the X. And the idea here is the exact same thing as in English, the difference between a and an, right? You'd say an elephant because elephant starts with an E. You wouldn't say a elephant. That would be tricky. But you wouldn't say an car. You'd say a car. So it's the exact same thing happening here. This chapter, in the previous story, there were places where it probably should have been A, the E with the long mark, and the book used X. It doesn't really matter. This is more why I always tell you to read the story aloud. If you were to say this phrase, e cassis, and compare it to ex cassis, you can hear yourself stumble a little bit when you use X. So the idea here is just making the language easier to speak. That's a long diversion to say, don't worry about it. The long E, in this case A, and X, both are the same thing. It's the preposition out of. So e cassis means out of their huts. And again, we're using the term cassis here because it's talking about the small huts that the slave women would live in, not necessarily in the house is the idea. Okay, so they hasten out of the huts or their cottages, however you want to translate it, and ambulant, they walk in ora et in silvis. They walk on the shore in ora. Remember, in can mean in English, right? You're inside something, or it can mean on. And when you're dealing with ora, it probably makes more sense to say on, right? You're not in the shore. That's not usually how you'd say in English, but on the shore makes sense. And in silvis means in the woods. Okay, so if you put it all together again, you're saying at night, the slave women hasten out of the huts and they walk on the shore and in the woods. all three, well, there's three prepositional phrases in the sentence, and all three of them are using ablative nouns. You have a cassis, in ora, et in silvis, right? So they're all ablative because they're two of them are showing position, in ora and in silvis. They're on the shore and in the woods. That's showing you their position or location, which would be ablative. The first one, a cassis, is showing motion out of something. And remember, motion out of or away from also takes an ablative noun when you're dealing with prepositional phrases in Latin. So now we continue to the last part. You have luna clara et stellae pulchrae servis de fessis sunt gratae. Okay, so you have the luna, which is the moon, and the stellae, which are the stars, which makes sense because we started this section with noctu, at night. Right? So if you take it all at once here, clara probably best means bright. So luna clara means the bright or the clear or shining moon. Maybe bright is the best translation. So the bright moon and the pulchrae stellae, the beautiful stars, right? And again, side note, notice how the adjectives have the same ending as their noun, right? Don't forget that idea we've been talking about of noun-adjective agreement. The adjective is always going to match the noun in case, number, and gender. The short version is usually they have the same ending. So that's how you can tell these are all going together. But you have the bright moon and the beautiful stars. They are sunt gratae, pleasing, right? And notice how gratae has an AE because it's talking about two different things. It's talking about the stellae, the stars, and the luna, the moon. So you're saying the bright moon and the beautiful stars are pleasing. When you have that adjective gratae, we need a dative. Who is it pleasing to? To the servis de fessis, to the tired slaves. It's dative plural. It's saying at the end of the day, they're tired, they go for a walk, and they like looking at the moon and the stars, right? You have tandem Claudia servas vocat. So finally, Claudia, right? She vocat, she calls. Who does she call? She calls the slave women. Servas is accusative plural. It's your direct object. So she calls them back, right? I guess that they don't run away would be the idea. But she calls them back and they return. So you have tum ex silvis et ab ora servae properant. Here you have ex silvis. This is what I was just talking about. You could have probably more easily said a silvis. It's the same idea. So you're saying tum, then, servae properant, the slave women hasten. Where do they hasten? Out of the woods, ex silvis. There's your first prepositional phrase. And again, it's ablative because you're showing motion away from something. And ab ora, right? So they leave out of the woods and away from the shore, ab ora. Again, that idea of going away from something has to be ablative, which is why you have the long A on ora. And this sentence is good to see the difference, or maybe not the difference, but just look at the different endings of the ablative case when you're dealing with first declension. Long is in silvis is the plural form, or the long A in ora is the singular form. Okay? But in the context of this sentence, or this story rather, they're ablative because, again, you're showing motion out of or away from with those two phrases, out of the woods, away from the shore. So this story is a shorter one, just introducing a new part of the story, new character. Nothing particularly crazy. It's still repeating a lot of the same grammar that we saw in the first part of chapter 7, but it's good as a way of just getting a lot of repetition and, again, seeing these grammar forms we've been working on in context. So you get a nice heavy dose, again, of prepositional phrases in this story, which is good to let you see the ablative. You're still mixing in older ideas too, like the dative, going with words like gratae. So it's a really good way to practice. Hopefully it made sense to you, right? And you didn't have too much of a problem with it. But if you did have any questions or anything you're not sure about, just put it in the comments below. I'll be happy to help you. But otherwise, just keep reading it until it makes sense, right? Keep practicing until you're feeling comfortable and you'll be fine. Good luck.